Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing for the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond.
This is the Web Platform Podcast, episode number 121, the webcomponents.org relaunch. I am your host this week, Danny Blue, and with me is Leon Revill.
Hello, everyone.
And we have two very special guests. We have Sam Lee.
Hi, so I'm a software engineer on the Polymer team here at Google.
And Taylor Savage.
Hey, I'm the product manager on the Polymer team, also at Google.
So first off, we said the relaunch. Congratulations on relaunching a thing. That's huge.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of work. Thank you.
Yeah, so for anybody that maybe doesn't know, tell us what webcomponents.org it is, or what it was and what it is now, how it got started, what prompted the rebuild and the redesign, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so webcomponents.org was a site with just a bunch of resources about web components. So it was completely just a place for the community to rally around. But it mostly just had resources like articles and podcasts, for example. And we noticed there were a couple other sites around. So there's the Polymer Elements catalog, which was, a very strong site. It had a listing of really great elements that the Polymer team had produced. One of the interesting things to note about that is, while it was really popular, it was a closed catalog. It only provided access to those in the Polymer team, and you could only publish them. There was no ability to publish them as a open source contributor. And there was another site, customelements.io as well, which was just an index of custom elements out there. And the interesting thing there was there are some kind of usability issues on that site, which made it difficult to kind of find a high quality component. And whereas the Polymer Elements catalog provided you documentation and demos, which allowed you to kind of really get into using a web component, customelements.io just had the GitHub README, so it didn't provide you that kind of level of usability. And so the new webcomponents.org is about kind of bringing all of those different sites into the one location. So web components, I think, have a great sell. One aspect is, the encapsulation, but building on that is about reusability. It's about how can we reuse a piece of code that someone else has written and encapsulated for us, and use that to build our site. And so building on that kind of shareability and these components which other people have built is going to be a really important part moving forward for web components.
So anybody can publish components on the site now?
That's correct. Yeah, anyone can publish a component.
So if I've built an awesome component that I want to share, how do I go about getting it on Custom Elements? Is it customelements.org? Is it a webcomponents.org? Excuse me. There's a lot there were several of them, but is there a vetting process, or do I just submit a PR, or what do I do?
There's no vetting process, so we want it to be as open as possible. So at the moment, it's just there's a publish button on the site, and you just link it to your GitHub repo. There's two kind of main requirements at the moment. One is that you have an open source license in it. That's really important for us to kind of maintain this open community where you can realistically pull down any of those components and use it in your site without having to worry about different licenses restricting that. And the second requirement at the moment is that it does have about.json. So we are dependent on that as of today.
Okay. No, that's really cool. I actually had not seen that. It's nice that that's all it takes is a button push, and then there it is. I'm sure that's huge for a lot of people. So you mentioned the Polymer catalog. That was, I guess, like, it was quite a big deal was made about it when Polymer 1, was it when Polymer 1 came out? So is that also still around, or is everything in webcomponents.org now?
That is still around for now. So you can go to elements.polymerproject.org and you'll still get the Polymer element catalog of old. We have built in a way to automatically have that redirect for you to the new webcomponents.org, and we've moved all of the Polymer elements. Well, not moved. We've published all of the Polymer elements in their right collections on the new catalog. So you can use today the new webcomponents.org site as a full-fledged replacement for elements.polymerproject.org. A few pieces of content that live on the old elements.polymerproject.org that don't currently live on the new site, so we got to find places for them to live. But we plan to eventually deprecate and kind of turn down the old element catalog and redirect everything to webcomponents.org. There's no real reason for us to keep the old one around. The new one has all the functionality the old one did and much, much more. So we're excited to be able to kind of shift out onto the open catalog and turn down our old closed one.
Yeah, no, this is, I mean, the whole thing sounds fantastic. I mean, the old, especially if anybody has looked at webcomponents.org in the past and you just so happen to stumble upon it today, it was all over Twitter and that kind of stuff. It's really, really cool, and it's kind of impressive how much stuff is in there compared to what it was. So like you covered this maybe a little bit of trying to. So you said that one of the reasons that this did happen is that there were a bunch of different resources. They were a little bit spread out, and you wanted to kind of consolidate all that kind of stuff. How did you? So so obviously with Polymer, it's pretty easy to work with that. Did you work with people from the open source community in building the new webcomponents.org?
Yeah, so the original webcomponents.org was entirely driven by a lot of big names in the web components community, Zena Roca among many, many others who built it and maintained it and kept content going and posted, kept it up to date. And the new one, yeah, we worked with the whole kind of group of people who were deeply involved in the original webcomponents.org and getting that originally set up. And we worked originally back in the old webcomponents.org to get it set up then too. So it's kind of been a continuation of part people from the Polymer team, part people from kind of the general open web component community. And the project itself is now all open source too in the web components organization. So you can go to github.com/webcomponents/webcomponents.org and see all the code that goes into the site and contribute it, add PRs. So it's the same kind of open community driven process that it always has been.
That's really, really good. And one of the other things I wanted to clarify, I believe I know the answer, but this is not Polymer specific. So we talked about, like everything. So like talking about the old Polymer catalog kind of being replaced with the new content, but this is not Polymer specific, right? Like this is any sort of web component thing. It could be a vanilla custom element. It could be Skate.js, Polymer. It could be anything, right? That's correct. Yeah. So the power of web components, I think, definitely comes from these small little encapsulated components. So Polymer was, a big driver of web components, but particularly with all the V1 specs landing across browsers today, I think we're going to start seeing a lot more vanilla components. They're going to be smaller, more lightweight, and just going to provide us, use in any kind of library or framework that you're already using today.
So on webcomponents.org, you've obviously got the concept of collections. Could somebody just kind of describe those in a little bit of detail, kind of how they work, what the idea is behind that, and kind of how that can help people find components that kind of work well together?
Yeah. So collections are about, an entity being able to provide a set of elements, but also about the community being able to organize these components. There are a lot of them out there, and it's a way for the community to kind of slice the web components in any kind of direction that they like. So, I have all these purple themed UI elements that I really like and want to group together. And so you can go and create a collection. It's just another GitHub repository, which you mark as a collection and then gets pulled into the site. So, we're hoping to see lots of awesome collections out there. We've got a bunch already. And, I've seen a collection of graph elements. It's kind of awesome to see that. So it makes it easier when you're looking at a particular element to be able to find another one in that category.
Yeah, it's nice to know that obviously those set of elements are going to work well together, have similar styling and all those other kind of things. So does the search facility kind of accommodate for the collections and individual components quite nicely as well? Is it easy to find collections and individual components? Is that kind of built in?
Yeah, it's built into, it shows both of those at the same time.
Cool.
So you mentioned with the V1 custom element spec that more we're expecting to see more sorry, brains all over the place. With custom elements V1, we're kind of expecting to see more vanilla custom elements that exist without a library. Since anybody can kind of publish something to it as with a limited set of criteria, will you currently still accept elements that are built on the V1 or on the V0 spec, or will those eventually be somehow automatically knocked down, saying like this is built with an old spec that nobody supports, so we're not going to accept it?
Yeah. So today we accept any kind of GitHub repository. We don't kind of do too much analysis. So we try and process the repository and try and see if we can pull out some more information. So particularly for Polymer elements, we're able to pull out kind of the static analysis documentation from it, and then provide the user with a really nice view of the documentation. But we accept any component, and we don't kind of look at V0, V1 as of today. It's something we can definitely do, but we haven't gotten to that stage yet.
Okay.
You mentioned the requirement of bower.json at the beginning. Is the plan to kind of support additional package managers like npm and yarn and those kind of things?
Definitely. That's a challenging aspect. I think we're going to want to move the ecosystem from Bower to npm at some stage. That's kind of yet to be determined as to how we're going to do that.
Yeah, we've been thinking a lot about that on the Polymer tools team, the team that's building the new analyzer and linter and all those projects. And their big mission is to not focus on Polymer specific stuff, but focus on building tools for all of web components. And so similarly, they're thinking about how do we move the Polymer ecosystem, but more broadly the web component ecosystem, parts of it that are on Bower over to npm and what that would look like. So we've got some preliminary work there in terms of how you might be able to both shift an individual component from Bower to npm, and then how you might be able to ingest and use components off of npm that use, for instance, HTML imports to be loaded. And so we'll be publishing more on kind of some of our early thoughts there pretty soon. And then the catalog itself, webcomponents.org, will shift along with the ecosystem to try to move everyone into a consistent spot.
No, that makes sense. There's a lot of stuff out there. There's so many different kind of ways that the ecosystem moves around, especially for how they package stuff. Which actually brings me to one other thing that I want to clarify with the site is that the site itself is not a package manager. This is not like NPM or something like that. Like when you submit your code does not now live on webcomponents.org. It still lives on GitHub. It's just now this is a way that it's being viewed. That's correct, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, sometimes a lot because that was a big thing between Bower and npm, for example, is that because Bower doesn't keep your code. It just keeps a reference to your GitHub repository versus npm, where you're actually uploading your code to npm servers, which I imagine is one of the big differences between using Bower and using something like npm to handle stuff.
Right. And this catalog is even more pull than Bower, I believe. Actually, no, it's the same case, but essentially if you tag a new release on GitHub, the catalog will pick it up, as opposed to npm, where you have to explicitly publish a new version to npm. Yeah. So it doesn't have that. That can be a limitation or a feature depending on how you think about it. But the webcomponents.org is meant to keep everything up to the latest state on GitHub. Treat GitHub as a source of truth.
Yeah. No, that is actually something I liked a lot about Bower. And like it seems a little bit like, oh well, like there's nothing fancy. I have to make sure it's up to date on GitHub and that kind of stuff. But I mean, you'll see now where there are GitHub or not GitHub, where there are npm publishing problems. So you'll see like little patch releases that are there, or like versions with a dash, like -2 or something like that, just because there was a problem publishing to npm. So I can totally understand that. Does it have to be GitHub, or can it be, as long as it's pointing to a remote Git repository, will that work?
It has to be GitHub. So
Okay.
part of it is about being open source.
Okay. Would you potentially open it up to just things like Bitbucket, because it's things like Bitbucket, or do you think like for right now GitHub has enough of a mind share that you just expect it to be there?
I think for now, it's definitely just going to be a lot easier for us to support just GitHub. If there is a need for other sources like Bitbucket, that's something we can look into.
Well, I'd really like to talk a little bit about kind of the tech you've used to build it. So is it built using Polymer? Is there any custom, any vanilla web components in there anywhere? Or kind of even like, how you're doing the indexing with the search, kind of any cool things you can share like that?
Yeah, so it is built on Polymer. The front end is built in Polymer. We've kind of built most of the components ourselves. Performance was definitely a big priority in our case. So we actually don't pull in too many dependencies otherwise. The back end is kind of all implemented using Google Cloud Platform services. So we use things like Compute Engine and App Engine to kind of host and process all our entities that we need. So we take a GitHub repository and we actually fire off a bunch of requests to GitHub to pull down the source code and pull down some metadata, and we are able to update based on that as well.
And it's a progressive web app, is that correct, right?
In a loose sense of the term, yes.
Yeah.
Brilliant. It looks absolutely amazing. Like, it looks really good. Really good work. Nice one.
So I actually want to dig into that a little bit more. So in a very loose sense, you said that it's a progressive web app. What do you also, for anybody that doesn't know, and I expect most of our listeners probably do, but a progressive web app is an app that meets kind of a certain set of criteria. So, for example, having an active service worker is one of the criteria. And if you have an Android device now, and something is with a certain version of Android, and Twitter is a progressive web app, for example, if you go to Twitter, I think it's twice, it will prompt you to add it to the home screen. And then it runs more like an installed application. And then they're doing all kinds of other fancy stuff trying to improve that process as well. But so when you say in a loose sense it's a progressive web app, are you missing a piece or two?
Right. So I think the key thing here was early on we identified the use cases, and the two kind of main use cases when it came to the element set was you're searching for a component and you're trying to find something that's going to suit your use case. And the second is we've already identified a component that we're using. We just need to look up some documentation of how it works and try and configure it to do exactly what I want. In both of those cases, they're mostly desktop use cases. And so we do expect the majority of our usage to come through desktop and not mobile. And a lot of the progressive web app the app feel doesn't particularly make sense in our use case. So we definitely support mobile, but there's not really a need for push notifications or offline documentation on your mobile phone. So some of that we can bring online and will be useful on desktop as well. But we have there is a service worker registered. It does kind of work offline, but it's not intended to be fully functioning.
There's a tool that we build on the Chrome team and distribute called Lighthouse, which is distributed. There's a command line tool. There's also a Chrome plugin. And that is a tool that's designed to kind of run a battery of tests against a web page or a web application and give you a breakdown of what's the performance like, and also what's the set of capabilities that it supports, and ultimately it gives you a score and some judgment of whether or not it's a progressive web app. So you can go run Lighthouse, you get a score from 0 to 100 around how progressive web appy, but also high performance that particular site is. So that's by Lighthouse's standards and by the checklist that we have on developers.google.com/web, it adheres to kind of some of the basic progressive web app features, which is why I bring that up. But I highly recommend the Lighthouse tool too. It's a fun thing to play with.
Lighthouse is very cool, and you can also, especially, it's very easy to just download the extension, and then you can go to any website and have it run. So if you're curious about anything that's out there, you can run it on any website, and it'll generate a report. It is a very, very cool thing, and because it's a CLI tool, you can even add it into your build chain if you really, really want to.
Totally.
On the homepage, there's featured elements and featured collections. Are they kind of like a manually selected at the minute, or is there some kind of intelligence behind choosing those, or how does somebody get a featured collection or featured element on the homepage of webcomponents.org?
Great question. So currently it is a fixed set. It's kind of some early ones we've identified which have a lot of nice features that we like about it. Moving forward, it will just be mostly a list of fresh kind of elements. By that I mean not just new, like just being updated is enough to kind of get it refeatured. It's something that we can kind of tune over time, depending on what we see as worthwhile.
Yeah. Again, the whole project is open source set in that GitHub repository. So that featured set would be a great area to kind of iterate on what a good ranking signal might be for good web components. So that's an opportunity for anyone who's got an idea to kind of file an issue or even submit a PR, be like, hey, I've got this idea for a way to, pick the best ones of the week or of the day, and then we can, as a community, decide how that featured block gets used.
Ooh, community voting. It'll be great.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the nice things about so CodePen has pick pens. And that's one of the cool things about that is you can go there every day or like every couple days and look at a bunch of new stuff that you potentially never would have found out. So it's always cool to I think a lot of times those types of features are a little bit underrated, as it were. But when they're done well, like they lead to some pretty cool discussion. But yeah, so. All right, webcomponents.org is brand new. There have been a bunch of kind of updates in the web component space. We've got V1, Chrome 54 shipped V1, I believe. Shadow DOM is in there. Those seem to be the two big ones that we're on the lookout for. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like those are the big ones.
Yep, that's correct.
What is the current status of the other browsers of shipping both or either of them?
Yeah, good question. So those are the big ones because the other two, template is one of the other two, which is already shipped everywhere, at least on all major recent browsers. And
so recent browsers. So is that Edge or 11?
I believe IE11 also is natively shipped template.
Awesome.
That we don't actually run template polyfill anywhere on the browsers that Polymer supports. And then the other one, HTML imports, is fairly easily polyfilled, and it's in a little bit murkier spec world land right now. So there's more to work out there with respect to ES6 modules. But fortunately, that's purely a loading mechanism, and loading can be relatively easily decoupled from the actual application and the way it works. So that polyfill doesn't provide or doesn't incur such a bad impact ultimately on the runtime of the application. So it's Shadow DOM and what custom elements are the most important. As of now, Chrome has shipped both custom elements and Shadow DOM v1. Safari shipped Shadow DOM v1 and has finished implementation of custom elements v1. So hopefully that will be shipping imminently in Safari. Unfortunately, Safari's uptake cycles are pretty fast. So I'd expect that when it does ship, it will be pretty broadly distributed very quickly. Firefox on their tracker, and you can go into their bug management software too, and see that both Shadow DOM v1 and Custom Elements v1 are in progress. So they've got active open bugs working on both of those. And similarly, since Firefox is evergreen, when those go out, they'll get distributed widely fairly quickly. And then Edge is the one where we haven't seen active work yet, but we know the team is very interested, and in their tracker, they have it on the high priority for both Custom Elements, or higher mid to high priority for both Custom Elements and Shadow DOM v1. So basically, everyone is either working on it right now, has shipped it, has completed it, or it's a known, like, on the backlog thing that's going to be built. We totally left that area of like, our browser is going to ever adopt this, which Web Components was in for a long time. So that's certainly a major, major milestone, just to know that they are coming. They are, by relying on the polyfills, you are relying on something that's going to disappear across all the major browsers, rather than like, is this a technology that I can trust yet? So really excited about that. And the timing of that is that's been very recent. And so that's, spurring a lot of the reason why it was a really good time to kind of take another look at Web Components at webcomponents.org and relaunch it in this way, because we've passed this major milestone now.
I want to talk a little bit about because it's awesome that they're there, but like they're not in all browsers yet, so they do require a polyfill of some sort. And I want to talk about those a little bit, specifically the Custom Elements one, because the Custom Elements one is a little bit weird, actually, or it can be a little bit weird, because at the and I actually ran into this firsthand during a talk where Chrome updated the night before, and then when I went to give my talk, none of my stuff worked, and I could not figure out why that was. The reason that is that the native implementation of Custom Elements requires classes, correct? So that's one of those weird things where even when you run your code through a compiler, through Babel or something like that, and it gets turned into ES5 code, that is not actually a class, and only classes can actually extend native elements. Correct? Correct?
Roughly correct. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
But so I want to talk a little. So you just run into this weird thing of where you can have code that works fine with the polyfill, but then when you run that same code with the native, you'll have problems. I know some of the maintainers of some of those polyfills have been working on it. But so the same way with what is the state of the current spec and the implementation, what is the current state of the polyfills for the different specs? Which ones are good? Which ones should not really avoid, but which ones are still a work in progress?
Yeah, good question. So it might be easiest to start with the Shadow DOM spec. So all of these v1 Shadow DOM, v1 Custom Elements are works in progress as of now. They're not totally fixed and stable yet, at least the implementations that are in the Web Components organization. And
you're talking about the polyfills.
The polyfills, correct. Yeah, so all the polyfills are being developed under the Web Components organization, the same organization that has the webcomponents.org site and that repository. So you can go there and look at the current state of the polyfills. So we've got the major plan for these polyfills. Currently, the V0 polyfills were all distributed in one single repo. They were all just the Web Components repo, and to use them, you basically used Web Components.js, or if you didn't want to use full Shadow DOM polyfill, you'd use Web Components Lite.min.js or Web Components Lite.js. And that was all the polyfills minus Web Components. There were some actual subtleties to that because all the polyfills in Web Components also included some other polyfills. So like there was a URL polyfill in there. There was some other it wasn't just the pure Web Components spec polyfills alone. And it was also kind of hard to figure out if you just wanted to just use the Custom Elements polyfill from that. It was hard to figure out exactly how you could. You'd have to kind of dig through the source code to figure out where it lived and figure out what other polyfills it might depend on. And so it ended up being kind of messy. Basically, it was kind of all or nothing. So we want to make it much, much clearer what polyfills are for what with the V1 specs and the V1 polyfills. So for that, we are independently building the Custom Elements polyfill as its own repository, just Web Components / Custom Elements. We're actually not currently rebuilding the Shadow DOM polyfill in V1. So Shadow DOM v0, we had a complete polyfill for But given just how ridiculously complicated it is to polyfill shadow DOM, as you can imagine, creating an encapsulation primitive where there is none all in JS is not possible. That's the reason why shadow DOM is a useful primitive in and of itself. And the polyfill is very heavy and very complicated, although it's a brilliant work of engineering. But it has to touch every single node in your document because it has to be able to wrap every node accessor every method that you might run that might also touch the DOM. So it's very complicated. So that's why in Polymer 1 we introduced Shady DOM, which was a much lighter weight, more targeted version that gave you some of the encapsulation that Shadow DOM did, but without the cost of the full Shadow DOM polyfill. So for V1, as we realized there was basically no one that we were aware of out there writing production applications on the Shadow DOM V0 polyfill. So we decided it's probably not worth trying to build a spec perfect Shadow DOM V1 polyfill. Instead, what we're doing is writing a Shady DOM shim and distributing that independently outside of Polymer so that someone can use Shady DOM the way Polymer uses it with that. So it's not pure native Shadow DOM spec compliant, but it gives you a lot of that behavior, and we'll drop down to native Shadow DOM where it exists. So we have the custom elements polyfill separate, Shady DOM polyfill separate, and then you don't need a template polyfill, and we have the HTML imports polyfill also separate. So you can take all of those independently, or you can mix and match. And then we are working right now on also providing kind of a built, ready-to-go version of all the polyfills, a web components JS again, that does combine them all into one place so that it's just kind of easy to plug and play. You don't have to think about what polyfills you're using, you just use that. So we want to make it more modular, but also provide that same kind of easy-to-use built version. So that's generally how we're approaching the V1 polyfills. Right now, all of the Shadow DOM the Shady DOM polyfill, or the Shady DOM shim, the custom elements polyfill, and the HTML imports polyfill, you can go and see their current status. They're mostly usable, but they're not perfect yet. You'll definitely run into some issues if you try to kind of use them. We're hoping to have them totally set and locked in the next kind of month or two and productionized and production ready. To your point on the custom elements polyfill, so this has been a big kind of up in the air question of, because custom elements v1 is deeply tied to ES6 classes, how do you ship it on browsers how do you ship code on browsers that don't support ES6 yet? So you need to transpile your code, but then suddenly that breaks on browsers that do support ES6 and custom elements v1 natively. So it's this kind of complicated matrix. So what we created was something called the native shim. So you can go into web component / custom element / source / native shim and read this little bit of JavaScript code that'll be able to kind of rejigger a class so such that it can be used in a so it can be transpiled and used, so that it can be used in a V1 environment. So you can take your transpiled code and use it in a V1 environment. It does incur a slight performance overhead. So what we're trying to end up with, the situation we're trying to end up with the tooling that we're building for Polymer, and also just for anyone building a web component, the same tooling should be applicable, is the ability to, on one hand, if you'd like, just create a works everywhere universal build that includes all the right polyfills and just works across all the major browsers, including back to IE11, with the right pieces polyfilled, but incurring that slight performance overhead in the case of native custom elements v1. Or for more kind of complex distribution setups, we want to provide the ability to build different kind of build targets that are served dynamically depending on what the browser supports. So that you can serve ES6 code to browsers that support ES6 and v1 with custom elements, or you can serve transpiled code to browsers that don't support ES6 or don't support native v1 custom elements. So we want to make that as easy to do as possible also, while having the universal build that just works. So it's a little complicated. It's certainly more complicated than it was in v0 land, but we hope that with just a little bit of tooling and the right kind of build artifacts, it can actually end up being fairly straightforward.
I think you covered it.
Yeah, that was a lot. Yeah,
that all sounds really good. I think it's really important that we get the the polyfill kind of story correct, because I've been playing around with web components for a little while now, and I've been telling people, web components are awesome, you should use them. And the amount of people that come back and say, I just can't figure out what polyfills I need, I can't get them working across the different platforms. So as soon as we get to a point where people can just drop something in and they're good to go, I think that's going to really kind of increase adoption. So that's really good news.
One other thing I want to point out is how good does it feel to say back to IE 11? Because I think that it's like, I almost weep as a web developer to hear back to IE 11.
Right. Yeah, no, it's pretty awesome. I mean, and from some major companies that we've been talking to, that seems to be what everyone is kind of coalescing around, which is, and even Microsoft. So it's great too. I totally agree. We're in a brave new world now.
Yeah. I mean, just the fact with that, and that we're so close to just having web components to just without having to think about polyfills and all that kind of stuff. I think we're so close. We're not there, but we're so close. And one other thing that's really good to point out about web components, and anybody who's listened to this show, we talk about web components all the time, but a lot of libraries that it's very, very easy to just drop web components into them. Angular 2, for example, it's in its, so it's post V1, they're working on all their cool stuff. You can just drop there's one config change, and then you can just drop custom elements into it. And you can actually write custom element schemas to only allow, because Angular's got all this really, really cool compiler stuff that will help warn you if you're using Angular components that aren't being used, but you can just say like, hey, I'm using custom elements, so it's fine. Or you can, through a little bit more complicated means, you can actually tell it, I'm using these tags are custom elements, so you don't have to worry about those. I believe they work pretty well with Vue.js as well. I know they mention web components quite a bit in their docs of like how they try to design and structure things. I believe they mentioned web components and Polymer specifically. So that's one of the big things, is you don't have to take everything. You can just start picking little pieces that you want to use. It almost feels like the jQuery plugin days, but much better and much more stable, which is why having such a really important thing like webcomponents.org to make it as easy as possible to, one, discover things, because discoverability is huge and is a difficult problem to solve. So having that is enormous, and just a place where you can post your stuff to share as well is fantastic.
Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the kind of the adoption of web components, and another really important part of that, which is a lot of resources in terms of content and articles and tutorials and stuff. And webcomponents.org has always been a great place that kind of collates a lot of these articles. So people that are relatively new to web components can go and see a load of stuff about various different topics, tutorials and those kind of things. But obviously, because of the recent-ish change from version 0 to version 1 of the specifications, obviously there's a lot of really outdated content now. So have you guys or anybody else in the community kind of got any plans to try and get people writing more content to help people out? Or obviously there's the Google developers and a lot of the other organizations that write some good content, but it'd be really good to see more and more people trying these things out, writing down the things that they've learned to really kind of spark the fire of web components among a lot more people. Is there any thoughts on that kind of thing?
Yeah, definitely. So we have some kind of documentation at the moment and guides around polyfills or just the introduction to web components, which we intend to be kind of evergreen documentation. So it's going to always be the latest, up-to-date, matching to the V1 implementations. And then there's the community content, which is basically where hoping, people publish lots of great content out there, different articles and presentations, and, having people from the community contribute and publish their work there is going to be awesome.
Yeah, so there's a separate repo that's github.com/webcomponents/community, where all of that content that's showing up now on the webcomponents.org community section, that's where that's published. So again, anyone can go on there and just kind of send a pull request to add a piece of content to that repo, and then it'll automatically get pulled into the actual site and get published on there. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible to kind of slap additional content into there so that we can get the kind of visibility around new content that's added. But I totally agree. Like that's where right now we're in this sort of critical period where V1 is happening and the web components, element catalog is happening, and we're seeing adoption on Polymer. We're seeing new web component libraries and frameworks like Skate come out, which is really exciting. So we're in this critical period, and it's about kind of keeping that drumbeat going with new content coming out. We're trying to do it on the Polymer team, but it's a very small team. And the web components ecosystem is much bigger than just Polymer. So it's really up to all of us included in the aggregate to kind of keep that content going, keep it out there. We're starting to build the channels to get attention to the content with things like the new web components that are at Relaunch. So hopefully writing a blog post is worthwhile. You get kind of a lot of eyeballs on that. And we're just also in the beginning of building best practices for things like web components. So there's still a lot of fertile ground to kind of break as an open source contributor and as a thought leader in the space. So there's plenty of stuff to discover. So I'm really excited. I think that there's a whole world of awesome content just waiting to be written and published out there. And it'll be a happy day when, the half of the Hacker News top articles are about web components.
It will be a great day indeed.
Or it won't be happy. Yeah.
On that idea of sharing knowledge and sharing information about web components, I'd just like to plug Web Components Remote Conference, which is next month, 16th and 17th, where tickets are going to be available pretty soon. Danny Blue's giving a talk there as well, which should be going to be really good. We've got some really good talks about all kinds of amazing topics around web components. So head over to wcremoteconf.com and check it out, and look out for ticket sales shortly. So I'm looking forward to that very much.
Yeah, and a big shout out to Eric Isaacson and Justin Ribeiro and to Leon for helping to put all this stuff together. I'm sure I'm forgetting other people as well, but I know Eric's been talking about wanting to do a conference forever. So very, very proud of that man for sticking to it and getting something done. Like Leon said, if you want to hear about RX integration stuff with web components, that's what I'm going to be talking about. So that should be a fun time. If you just want to hear a lot of words you may not have heard before, it'll be fantastic. But yeah, so we're starting to run up against our time here. So if one or both of you want to give a little bit of a I don't know, like roadmap or ultimate goal, or where webcomponents.org is going now. This huge thing has just happened, but there must be a plan going forward. So what are the plans for it? Are there new features you want to add? And yeah, please just.
Yeah, so webcomponents.org is really just the beginning. The site can only go so far with all the best features out there. The really important aspect is the community. It's the components that are contributed to this community which are going to make it really strong. It's not really about the implementation of the site and what features that it has. That's all nice, but it's ultimately the quality of the components. So the ideal kind of success outcome for web components, in my mind, is kind of what we mentioned earlier. It's where you can get to a point where you are able to take a custom element and use it in your application and drop it in without any fear or worry. It's about the same kind of friction as you would for a regular kind of implemented HTML element. That's the kind of level of friction that is the ultimate goal. And so with that, it's going to be really important to maintain a really high bar of quality across components. So, if you have a custom element that you use in your site and it turns out that it's not really well implemented, your trust in kind of web components as a whole goes down. And so I think it's going to be really important for us as a community to maintain a super high bar of quality. It's, one is performance, another one is accessibility, which is going to be a really important aspect. Another is compatibility. Browser compatibility is one of them. So being able to drop this element in, you can use it in almost exactly the same way as you would, you're using some other HTML element and you go to MDN for documentation. That's the kind of level of friction we want to get to. So there's plenty of different features we can add to the site. There's been ideas tossed around about performance, surfacing performance kind of numbers, being able to show, how this component might impact your load time, and trying to kind of get the community to think about that more. Another one is accessibility, as I mentioned. There's some ideas on how we can potentially surface more accessible information and automatically run a lot more tooling in our kind of pipeline. So now that we have all these kind of web components going through this pipeline, we can start running a lot more tooling on those components once the tooling is there. So, you know, a tool that gives us performance numbers, a tool that gives us accessibility information, we can start surfacing all of these different pieces on the site. So there's plenty of work to come, but I think it's time for the community to kind of come together and contribute and see what we can build together.
I'm super excited for all of this too. And like Sam says, it's all about the content of the quality of the content that gets on there, the quality of the components. And I'm excited too to see what having this kind of like hub, it's not a centralized place to put components because there's no need to put it on there, and others could obviously very easily build their own independent components, but it's kind of, or independent catalogs. It's a hub of where this web component activity will hopefully happen. And when we have that, I think it will enable a whole bunch of other products too to be built kind of around it. So you can imagine if the catalog could have kind of an API that could allow you to search components or get component documentation or get component actual API references and descriptions. You could build like plugins to IDE that let you kind of get documentation in line as you build an application out using components. Could automatically, you know, find a definition for and install a component that you use in your application. You could imagine like a WYSIWYG editor, for example, that has a palette of components that you can choose from any component that's on the webcomponents.org site. You can search right inline in that IDE and then drag it in and assemble a UI that way. So by having like a really rich repository of all these different components together, all sort of documented in a consistent way, I think there'll be a lot of really interesting emergent behavior that'll come from that.
Maybe so something else that I actually think would be cool is maybe even some sort of a browser extension where you could select an element like on a page that you were interested in, and it would automatically search or like just take you straight to that page of the of webcomponents.org. Yeah, why don't you guys do that one?
Totally. Yeah, no, exactly.
Awesome.
Everything like this. Yeah.
Well, congratulations again, guys. Like it is a very exciting time for web components. I know me personally, I started to get a little bit down about them for a little bit. Like it just seemed like the wheels were turning and there was just a lot of butting heads about it, but it seems that everybody's on the same page, one big happy web family. So I'm very excited for what's to come, and what you guys have built from my, a day of fiddling around with it looks really, really good. And I'm hoping that a lot of people come and check it out. We will obviously, it's webcomponents.org. We'll put a link in the show notes for anybody that can't figure that part out. Does anybody have any parting words that they want to say? Anything that they, just anything cool that they want to share?
I just want to say that if you've not already tried web components, then you should definitely give it a go. And now you've got the perfect opportunity to go and find a load of really cool elements, try them out, and then try build your own. Like, definitely do it.
Totally.
I actually think that is everybody that's listening. That is your homework. Go to webcomponents.org and try to build a single page with only elements found without writing any of your own, with only building up with only elements that you find on that page. I think that would be very cool. And if anybody does actually do that, please tweet at us and share it, and we'll try to put it out there. I think that'd be a very cool experiment.
That'd be awesome. One feature we didn't plug that I want to make sure we plug really quickly is the inline demos that are supported by the web component catalog. So in your README, we created a little format. So right in your README inline, you can create a comment that includes some custom element tags and HTML that would show like a demo of how your component works. And then the catalog will hydrate that when your README gets shown for your component and actually spit out a live demo of that demo that you put in your README. And it'll put it in a format that's editable. So someone who comes across your element can actually go and edit the demo code and get kind of inline refreshes and updates to the element. So it gives you an opportunity to play with the web component like the minute you see it and learn by playing with the component right there. So it's a really cool feature. So I recommend checking that out. There are many of the Polymer components have these inline demos already. Many of the other components that are featured right now have inline demos. So check it out, start playing with it. It gives you some cool ideas of what you can do with the catalog.
And is there documentation on the site of how to do that for your own components that you want to publish? Fantastic.
Yes, that's on the publish page.
Awesome. Cool. Well, all right, guys. Thank you very, very much for joining us today. Everything looks really awesome. It's exciting time to be a web developer as always, and I think this is a great excuse. I think I actually may take up my own the homework assignment that I spat out about seeing what I can build with only existing custom elements and see what comes out of it. So this has been episode 121 of the Web Platform Podcast. It's not hard. Been doing it for 121 episodes, and I still trip over it. Episode 121 of the Web Platform Podcast, all about the brand spanking new webcomponents.org. Thank you, and we'll talk to everybody next week.
You want to learn more about what's coming on next on the Web Platform Podcast? Follow us on Twitter at the Web Platform, or on Google Plus and YouTube at Plus the Web Platform. We also need your help in creating transcripts of the episodes and helping to create open source projects under our GitHub organization. Contact Eric Isaacson at eIsaacson
or Danny Blue at D_Blue. That's DEE_BLOO.
Thank you for listening, everybody, and we'll catch you all next week.